Hello book lovers and welcome back to our channel. In today's video I'll be doing the final part to my Ruby Red series where I'll be comparing the book versus movie of Sapphire Blau and Sapphire Blue. I know that it's been a while since we've uploaded on this channel and there will be a video coming out soon explaining why, but for now I am here to give you the final part to this series. So let's get started. As usual, here is a spoiler warning for this video, as there will be spoilers for the movie and the book. If you have read both the book and watched the movie and you just want to skip to the comparison or my thoughts, the timestamp is somewhere around here. Okay, so let's get started. I will be starting with the movie because I have the movie written out first and then I'll talk about the book after that. The movie starts with a prologue in 1782 where James, the school ghost at Gwen's school, is getting vaccinated by Lucy and Gwen from the future. Then back into the future, Gwen is remembering moments in her relationship with Gideon, and we see that the chronograph is now being kept by her bedside. It then cuts sideways to Gideon, who is in his apartment reading the prophecy. Again, it cuts to the lodge where Mr. Whitman is now being made Grand Master of the lodge. After this, Leslie calls Gwen and explains to her the whole concept of having a marzipan heart, where it's moldable, and how Gideon has basically bitten off part of Gwen's heart. After this, it then cuts to a couple of days later and it's shown that Gwen hasn't gone back to a lapse at the lodge for quite some time now, and Mr. Marley and some other men from the lodge try and come to kidnap her to try and force her to elapse. This doesn't work and she uncontrollably time travels back into the past to see Shakespeare, and she gives him the idea for the to be or not to be speech. She then comes back and the audience is then told that she hasn't elapsed in several weeks now. She then goes back to elapse with Gideon and they go to the 50s. And this is where Gideon tells Gwen that he doesn't want to be in a romantic relationship with Gwen anymore and that he just wants to stay friends. At this point, Mr. George isn't at the lodge either anymore. Gwen then goes home and Aunt Maddie has been protecting the chronograph at home whilst Gwen has been going to school and doing all other activities. What is a bit odd is that Aunt Maddie and Bernard seemingly have started being in a romantic relationship, which is a bit odd. After this, Gwen and Charlotte talk about the Green party, and so Gwen and Charlotte are talking and Charlotte suspects something, so that Gwen might be hiding something. The Guardians then break into the house and search everywhere for the chronograph and are messing everything up in the house, and they also have searched Gideon's house at the same time. They then take the box where Charlotte had said that the chronograph was in, and try and break it open, and then they discover that the chronograph isn't actually in the box, it is in, and the box is just filled with stuffed crochet pigs. Charlotte then feels bad about this because she had obviously not told the lodge, like, what she had said wasn't the truth to the lodge, and Mr. Whitman yells at her, and Gideon also questions why she would do such a thing to her family, and she feels ashamed. So during the Green Party, Gideon decides to go travel back in time by himself to 1786, where he then gets locked in the dungeon by Rakowski. and this is at the Green Party where Charlotte then sings karaoke. After Gideon gets locked in the dungeon, the Guardians try and break into the house where Gwen and Charlotte live, but Charlotte then protects Gwen, and Gwen runs away to a cottage in the country with Mr. Bernard, and Charlotte helps her escape by giving her like a box with all these things that she'll need for when she runs away, like a fake passport, another phone, etc, etc. Gideon is now locked in the dungeon and he has to travel back and forth to give messages to Mr. Whitman in the future and the Count in the past. And Gwen finds out in the future that Mr. Bernard is actually her nephew because after because her parents in the past had a child and that child had another child. And she also learns that Gideon is actually missing back home. Gwen then visits Lucy and Paul in the 60s, whilst Charlotte infiltrates the lodge and tries to help Gideon. Gwen then learns in the 60s that she is actually able to control her own time travel without using the chronograph. So she then decides, or her and her parents decide, that she should go back to the 20s when they were in the cottage back then, so that she could learn some self-defense skills from her parents in the past. Gwen then gets a letter that she has to save, or to save Gideon she has to attend the ball, which she then does because she goes back to London to save Gideon. Madame Rossini then helps her by concealing some weapons in her clothing, whilst at this time Mr. Whitman is revealed to be the Count, as he has somehow learned how to be immortal. And in the past the Count is able to get Gideon's blood to fill the chronograph. Gwen then travels back to the ball, and Rakowski is, whilst he isn't drunk or drugged, he still gives the same speeches in the books. And Rakowski tells Gwen about immortality and what it is. Whilst at this time Gideon escapes. He escapes with Charlotte's help. After Rakowski has finished talking to Gwen, the Count arrives and tells her that Gideon had died. But before Gwen can do anything, Gideon arrives and they steal the chronograph from the Count. They then kiss, but whilst getting chased, Gideon gets shot. Gideon's blood is then put into the chronograph. Gwen gets shot and Gideon is shot again. Both of them are dead, and the result of this is that the Count is now immortal. So then both of their bodies travel back to the future, and it turns out that Gwen isn't actually dead because she is an immortal. After this, Gwen and her family goes back to the cottage and they have a funeral for Gideon. Gwen then discovers that she is immortal unless she tries to kill herself. Charlotte stabs Gwen to test out the theory, and it turns out that it's true. Gwen also travels through time without using the chronograph, like it was shown beforehand, and she travels to Lucy and Paul to try and think of a way to save Gideon. Gwen tries to learn to control these powers of time travel, and she visits Aunt Maddie in the past, which is, according to my notes, a very funny scene. She then travels back into the past to save Gideon again, and James tries to help her, but it just kind of doesn't work because Gwen then discovers that she is too late, which she knocks out the Guardians. She is too late and she has to try again. Then when she does, she manages to knock out the Guardians, and in the future when they are dead, or basically when they don't take the immortality drugs, the Mr. Whitman, or the Count, he disintegrates in the future. Gwen then saves Gideon and they kiss again and everyone is happy, basically. In the future they discover that the school is actually called the Pimplebottom College now, and that William, who was the Grandmaster before Mr. Whitman was, he is now the caretaker at the school. And then in the epilogue it shows Gideon and Gwen in the 20s, where Gwen then drinks the Philosopher's Stone to become immortal now. Or there is another alternate ending where Gideon drinks the Philosopher's Stone to become immortal with Gwen. So now I'll just try and as quickly as possible, I'll run through the book now. So it starts with a prologue in 1912, which is just right after what happened in the last book, where Paul has gotten into a fight with the Alliance to get the papers, and then he gives them to Gideon. This is the aftermath of that, as he is now back trying to get healed from the wounds that he got from that fight. It then goes to Gwen, who is dreaming about getting stabbed, and then Leslie gives her amazing marzipan analogy. Afterwards it's revealed that Leslie and Raphael have discovered where the chronograph is and that it's in the house. Zemirius then goes around the house to try and find the chest, and he finds it behind the painting of Gwen's great uncle or grandfather, I'm not sure. Nick wakes up as Gwen is trying to go down to the painting and joins Gwen after she tells him about Zemirius. Mr. Bernard then notices them awake and tells them to get the chest some other time when no one is home. The next day at school, Cynthia invites Leslie, Gwen and Charlotte to the Green Party, and after school at the lodge, Gwen has to elapse, and Gideon then, but before Gwen has a chance to go to elapse, Gideon asks her if it's alright if they just stay friends. Gwen then goes to see her grandfather, and they figure out that he must have left her the chronograph, so that the coordinates lead to the chronograph. They then go to read the Gwen into the chronograph that is the one that he left for her, and Gwen goes further back in time to meet Lady Tinley, where she gives her a crochet pig, and Gwen gives Lady Tinley the note that her grandfather gets when they first met. And after coming back to the future, Gideon tries to fix things with Gwen, but it doesn't work, and Gwen finds out that Mr. Marley is actually one of Rakowski's ancestors. After the dinner, Bernard says that it's a time to get the box out of behind the wall, and they find out that the key that Gwen took from the first book, where she first travels back in time at the lodge, where she took the key, that's the key that unlocks the box where the chronograph is in. So that night she uses the chronograph to meet with Lucas in their house, but he still doesn't know enough. After this, Charlotte almost finds out about the chronograph, but Bernard intercepts them before Charlotte can take the box from Gwen. And Gwen then hides the box in a stuffed crocodile behind her closet wall. The next day, Charlotte is apparently sick, and although Gwen has to go to school, Maddie protects the box. Gwen then in the afternoon pretends to be sick so that she doesn't have to go to the ball, and it turns out that she actually is sick. Gwen then goes to a lapse, and then later at night she visits Lucas again, and he gives her the Anna Karenina book, which has all the information that he has discovered about the lodge in it. And again, Charlotte is suspicious here. Gwen then stays home the next day to recover, but what happens is that the lodge people break in and they try to steal the box, but luckily Aunt Maddie had put the chronograph somewhere else. When Whitman and Marley then get Gwen to a lapse, Marley apologizes, but Whitman is still very suspicious. Gwen then goes to a lapse, but Gideon is there as well. He questions why Charlotte is so suspicious and tells Gwen that he has gotten more of the blood that is needed for the chronograph. And he asks her a question which is a bit ominous, because it's about if killing one life could spare millions, is it worth it? To which Gwen says no, because every life is worth a lot. The next day Gwen goes to the ball, and Gwen and Gideon, and Gwen finds out that her and Gideon's goal at the ball is to find out who the traitor in the lodge is. Gwen and Gideon dance, but then Gideon goes and dances with Lady Lavinia, and Gwen tells James to meet her at Hyde Park later in that time. Gwen is then lured into a back room by Rakovsky, but Gideon saves her and they fight. Gideon saves her, but they fight about Lavinia, and whilst they do this, Gwen sees her past self, which is actually the time in the first book where she saw her past self, where she saw her future self kissing Gideon, and like that time, Gideon and Gwen then kiss. They're interrupted then by Lord Alistair and Lord Alcott, where it's discovered that Lord Alcott is the traitor in the lodge, and they get into a fight and Gwen gets stabbed, and you hear her own point of view as she is a ghost and she sees her dead body, which is really fun. Then they both travel, Gwen and Gideon both travel back to the future, and although Gideon thinks that Gwen has died, they find out that Gwen is still alive. And then after dinner, Gideon visits Gwen at her house, and he finds out that she's an immortal, and that Gwen has to kill herself so that the Philosopher's Stone in the chronograph will work, but she has to die for love for Gideon, which is why he tries to not make her love him. Yeah. So the next day, Gwen elapses, and afterwards she finds out that Lucy and Paul are actually her parents. Before she goes to a lapse, she finds out that Lucy and Paul are her real parents. Gideon then goes to a lapse with her as well, and he comforts her. Gideon then talks to the inner circle, and then after they get there, then they go to Madame Rossini, and she gets them costumes for the green party. After this, Gwen and Gideon go to the roof of her house where the chronograph is, so that they can read Gideon's blood into the chronograph. They then get the Philosopher's Stone because the circle is finished, has been fulfilled, and then they go into the past to meet Lucy and Paul, and they make a plan to stop the Count from getting the Philosopher's Stone. Then is the green party where Charlotte gets drunk and they have to get her home. Well, Gideon gets Charlotte home whilst Gwen, Leslie and Raphael go back to Gideon's apartment to plan what their plan is, basically. The next day, Gwen and Gideon go back into the past to stop past Gideon from giving the letter to the Count about the diamond and, well, about Lucy and Paul basically. And this is also where in the past book Gideon got knocked over the head with the flashlight. After they've done this, they go back to Elapse again to give James the vaccination, so that he is immune to smallpox, I think it is. Then Gwen and Gideon go back to the temple to Elapse and basically to go see the Count. Gideon is then sent out on a mission, and Gwen gets poisoned and is sent back to the future. This is where it's revealed that Mr. Whitman is actually the Count. And Mr. Whitman basically tells Gwen that as soon as she was born he stopped being immortal, and once Gwen dies the Count will be immortal again. He also tells Gwen about how Mr. Marley Sr. was the one who poisoned Lucas, or her grandfather Lucas, because he got too close to finding out the secret. As the secret about Gwen dying basically. Gideon then comes back to the future and Mr. Whitman shoots him. Dr. White has also been passed out in the room, but he wakes up and manages to hit the Count and knock him out basically. Gideon then reveals that he is immortal as well, because when he was in the past, Lucy and Paul forced him to take the Philosopher's Stone so that he would be immortal with Gwen together. And that's basically the end. And now for the epilogue, Lucy and Paul are now part of the Secret Service and they are expecting another baby. And they go by the name Mr. and Mrs. Bernard now, which is very interesting. So now that we've run through the books and the book and the movie, you can probably tell that there are a lot of differences between this book and movie. And basically by a lot of differences I mean that they are nothing alike and there is basically nothing the same about any of them. That is one of the main things that I really don't like about this movie and book. And whilst, like I said with the second one already, they are great standalone movies and books, but when you have read the book and you are expecting to have the events happen in this order and have everything make sense and have every loose end tied up, and then that doesn't happen, it does leave you with a feeling of disappointment. One of the main things that I felt was how in the first movie, how she saw herself kissing Gideon in the future, and that happened in both the books and the movies. And then the books it paid off because you then see it from the future Gwen's perspective, but in the movies they never refer to that scene ever again, and it doesn't make any sense in the context of the books or the movies. I also love that in the book they had the whole thing with the key and how you kind of forget about it in the second movie because it isn't as important, but then you actually do discover in this movie that it was, or in the book that it was important, because it all was part of the plot to like have Gwen, or let Gwen have the chronograph. And I find that very interesting because you obviously need to have a bit of a sense of like what's going on or what's going to happen in your book from start to finish, and like in your series in particular, because that had to be planned out early, unless she just kind of forgot about it till this book and then realized, oh, I still have this key going on. Yes, but there are some things that I think that the movie did better, and more specifically in the movie, they actually explained Charlotte's like character arc, like how she was a bad person and then became a good person. And I really like how they did that in the movie, and how they actually made her likable, and how they showed that she did learn from her past mistakes and that she is a better person now after she helps Gwen and after her and Gwen bond a lot. In the book she just kind of feels bad about not being able to please the lodge and do everything right for the lodge, which it doesn't really show any growth with her character at all. Another thing that I guess was good about the movie is I like how the scenes that they did show, that, or the things that were shown from the books that were in the movie, that they looked really well done, and that they were like how, at least how I imagined them in the movie, in the book I mean. And some of the changes that they had put in were interesting, like an interesting movie to follow. I think if they had stuck to the books exactly, it wouldn't have been as interesting as of a movie, and I think that is also why they had to have so many of the reveals from the second book, or from this book, in the second movie, because otherwise that movie would have just seemed a bit off or a bit boring, which they can't exactly do, because otherwise no one would watch the movie. Also, like, I like how they actually found a way to stop Mr. Whitman, or the Count, how he didn't how in the book he just kind of gets locked up, and whilst in the movie he actually disintegrates. I guess it might just be me because I'm not too fresh on the book, but I don't think that they explain well how, or at least they don't explain it well, how the Count did become immortal, because there was no one to give the past Count the elixir from the future, if I have that in my head correctly, unless Gideon did go back and give the Count that might have been what happened, but I think I'm just a bit confused on that. One of the things that I thought the book did well was kind of keep the whole thing with Mr. Bernard as an open end. They alluded to the fact that Lucy and Paul might be related to Mr. Bernard, and that therefore Gwen was related to Mr. Bernard, but they didn't outright say that he was Gwen's nephew like they did in the movie. And I guess that left it more open for people to imagine what happens next, like in the form of fan fiction or something like that. Yes, but otherwise I think that the movie was interesting and that it did work well with the second movie and made sense, but there was just a couple of plot threads that just were not done well in the movie, or as well as they were done in the book, and sometimes I do wish that they had just kept by the book and done exactly what the book had done, but I also realized that that would have just not made for an interesting movie. I think that's all for today. I hope you all like this video, and I hope that it's not too long. If you have any thoughts about this movie or book, which you preferred, what you liked or disliked about the movie or the book, please let me know in the comments down below. Make sure to give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon, hopefully with some more videos. Make sure to stay safe, wash your hands lots, and I'll be seeing you soon. Bye!